diving right in, what are the most common early relationship pitfalls and red flags that couples can potentially avoid if only they were to be aware of them?
I mean, I feel like the thing that gets all of us in trouble early on in a relationship is we might see something we don't like, and then we get angry about that thing, or hurt by that thing, or judgmental about that thing, and we react, and we might push them away, or we might argue about it, but rarely are they seeing what's really going on behind that thing. That's whatever has kind of triggered us, whatever's activated us. Rarely are they seeing what's really going on behind that. Like I had a client who was, by all accounts, dating a guy that was, bringing her great energy. It had been good. And then one Saturday early on in their dating, he had a small gathering with his friends and he hadn't invited her, and she was really hurt by it. And it brought up all of her stuff, like abandonment, all this story she had. I like him more than he likes me. Here it is, this moment where all of a sudden, I'm going to get hurt. I'm going to get my heart broken. And she tried to ignore it. Like she first went avoidant. And then sometime during that Saturday, she texted him and she said, "Why didn't you invite me?" And he said, "Oh my God, these are a group of friends I haven't seen in a while. I was just really excited to see them. It was nothing to do with you." Or he said, "Can I call you later?" And she wrote back and said, "Don't bother." And he then didn't. And 4 days later, she was talking to me and saying, "What do you think? Like he hasn't texted me since then." And of course it brought up everything that she didn't want it to bring up. She didn't want to be abandoned, but she precipitated the very thing that she was most afraid of. And I can see ways that whole situation could have gone so much better. And without, like, she could still get triggered. She could still have that moment of like, wow, I'm really hurt that I didn't get invited. But how she then approached that could have made all the difference in that situation. And instead, she just really pushed this person away. And I've got my own versions of that. I've got examples of me and my wife, Audrey, fighting at the beginning of our relationship where I almost lost the relationship because I was, remember very early on getting jealous about something and bringing her like just antagonistic, defensive like attitude and not really communicating the fear behind what was going on. And as a result, like nearly kind of like, dropping a small grenade into the relationship before it even got going. And I just looked kind of like a dick. I didn't look like the good person that I really am. I just looked like someone who was, angry or controlling or, not great to be around and reactive. And so luckily, her communication style and then my ability to, check myself led to a much better outcome. And I can talk about what that was. But I think early on in dating, we all at some point, something activates us, something triggers us. And the way we react to our triggers often pushes people away, turns them off, makes them judge us, makes them misread us, makes them think that we're a different person than we really are. And the same is true of them. So we often never really learn who they really are. And that's like the saddest part about it all.
Yeah. Where do these lapses come from? Is it just like insecure attachment?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of, I think there's a lot of fear about, I've seen this before. I know what this is. I'm going to get hurt here. It activates some kind of wound that we've had probably for a very, very long time. And for many of us, places that we don't even know or have never really explored. There are people that get, just debilitatingly anxious when they don't get a text back for a few hours or a few days. And they don't know why that is. They just know that I can't seem to function. My brain has been hijacked by the fact that this person hasn't texted me back, and I am miserable, and I can't seem to do anything else. And now I certainly can't bring my best when I speak to that person. But people don't know where that comes from. And it's also, by the way, those wounds are also what make us constantly chase the wrong things, chase these things that get us hurt. Because if you're someone who, let's say in childhood, you had a capricious parent, you had someone who gave you attention but then withdrew it, and you felt very unsafe, you felt very insecure, you felt very abandoned, and then 4 days later, after giving you very little love, they come home with a present, and then you feel safe and loved, and oh my God, they were thinking of me, and you learn that that's love. Oh, these feelings I have, that's the real stuff. And so you grow up, and now someone doesn't text you for 5 days, but on the 6th day, they send you a message and say, "What are you up to?" And you go, "Oh my God, they are thinking of me. I'm okay. I'm safe. My God, I love this person." This is love. This is the real thing. Look how much I feel for this person. And that's that's where so much of the trouble starts, is thinking things are love when they're not love, thinking things are like important when they're not important, when it's just trauma being activated. It's a whole world. Once you start realizing these things about yourself, you can realize you're like programmed for bad highs.
Yeah.
And unless you can deprogram yourself away from some of those bad highs, you're going to constantly chase people and things that make you miserable.
It's so true. It reminds me of the concept of like intermittent reinforcement. It's one of the reasons why slot machines in Vegas, they're like the top moneymaker for casinos in Vegas.
Oh, yeah.
People sit in front of them, and you never know when you're going to hit that jackpot, right? But it's the same thing with people who text intermittently. Like, it kind of hooks you. And usually the people who are more likely to do that, I would presume, are more insecure attached themselves, more avoidant. But yeah, I mean, that could be incredibly painful to the person on the other side, particularly if they're of the anxious, insecure type.
It's really interesting. That's a very good comparison, the one with the slot machine. The what was it, intermittent reward?
Intermittent reward, yeah.
That's a really sharp way of looking at it, because that's what it is. I mean, that what you just described is the trauma bond, right? It's I suffer, but then you rope me back in with love or, validation, or suddenly, giving me the attention that I need, and you make me feel high again, and you make me feel, oh my God, I'm okay. And then that good moment is the thing that keeps you going. And then it gets bad again, and you are in hell. And, it's that is that bond you're talking about. And it keeps bringing you back in with the good, and the good really. A couple of things make you think that this whole thing is really important. One, the good feels so good, the high feels so high, and even just the fact that you're feeling so much, both in the good and the bad. Because when you're feeling bad, why would that give me a signal that this is the right thing? But the fact that you're feeling so much, it really feels like that must be passion.
Can feeling extreme highs in and of itself be a red flag?
Yes. Yes.
It kind of reminds me of like when you're eating a really like hyper palatable junk food.
Yeah.
Like it tastes impossibly delicious, but it's not. It's engineered to taste that way, and ultimately we know that those are the kinds of foods that are generally not good for you to consume chronically.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right, and it's why I think at a certain point we have to almost train our nervous system to respond to a different kind of feeling altogether. It doesn't mean that we have to search for relationships where there's no passion. It's just we have to start looking at what is it I'm calling passion. Like what is this thing, when someone comes into my life and I feel completely hijacked and giddy, what is that? And is it the right basis for my decisions? Because there are some people who are really good at creating that in you. They are they like the food that's been engineered for the ultimate taste high. They have engineered the experience that they give you on a date or on a weekend away for the ultimate emotional high of early love, of passion. And that's a very dangerous thing. For me, I know that at a certain point in my life, passion never stopped being important and chemistry never stopped being important. But I also recognized that as a single person, there were highs that I was getting that always somehow left me feeling worse and that weren't going to work for me long term, and also often left me feeling anxious, often left me feeling like my life was chaotic and disordered. And just, I realized, oh my God, what I want more than anything is peace. Like I am craving peace. And I think a lot of people reach that point, unfortunately, through enough pain that peace is now the goal. And again, it doesn't mean they want to sacrifice romance or attraction, but those same crazy spikes that they used to think of as love now start registering as something else. And it's kind of training ourselves to truly appreciate something else. And that's not easy, especially when your nervous system is used to those spikes. It takes time to get out of that. If you take a drug addict and you say to them, on the day that they quit, you say to them, now sit on this ledge and appreciate this sunset. It's not going to register, because that can't compare. It can't, the very grounded, centered, peaceful, awe-inspiring, existentially connected gratitude you may feel when you're in full appreciation and when you're feeling connected and mindful for a sunset can't compare to the giddy high that you had just last night on artificial stimulant. Like, it can't do that. So that's probably not the day you're going to appreciate nature. But it doesn't mean that nature isn't incredible or sustainable or life-giving. It doesn't mean that it's not even better once you've retrained your nervous system to appreciate it. But it's never going to be that thing. That spike and crash and spike and crash, it's going to be something else. And I think, I feel like our lives change when we're ready to embrace that something else.
Absolutely, man. What you're saying is so incredibly important, and it's so analogous to when people are trying to clean up their diets too. I mean, it's like nothing. Whole food is whole, real, perishable, natural foods will never compare in terms of the dopamine spike that they lead to these ultra processed, man-made, lab-made creations. But there is a degree of palate retraining that has to occur, and it's so worth it. It takes there's a hurdle, I guess, but it's so worth it. And it's like, once you do, you start to realize just how delicious whole food is, and nourishing. It's delicious in ways other than that momentary bit of mouth pleasure that you derive from food, but it makes your body feel good. It makes you perform better. So yeah, it's so powerful. It's so analogous.
It's funny when I hear you say that. I'm like, oh, I need to be closer to you and your mindset around that, and where you've arrived at with that, because that's still something I'm struggling with in my life.
Interesting.
Yeah. So like, my love life is an area where I feel like I've retrained my nervous system in that way, and I now am addicted to a different kind of feeling. And in my relationship with food, I haven't quite arrived there yet. Like, I'm still struggling with that. That's been like a lifelong struggle for me. And it's, I'm lucky in that my genetics have helped me a little bit in terms of I haven't struggled historically with weight, but I'm big on training, and I love, my sport and stuff, but that relationship with food is something I can't claim to have arrived where you're talking about yet.
But I'm sure if you were to just apply the same framework that you're so
Yeah.
eloquently, you've developed such a mastery over with regard to your relationships, to your relationship, to your relationship with food, I'm sure you would excel.
Yeah, and I probably reached a greater pain threshold in my relationships or in my love life than I did with food yet. And so I think that, like I said, for a lot of people, it gets to a point where it's like, oh, this truly isn't working for me anymore. And I think probably with food, because I train a lot, and because I do, I'm good a decent amount of the time, it's like it's never reached that threshold yet where I'm like, oh, I gotta do something about it. But it doesn't stop me binging on, bad foods a couple of times a week, and in the mornings feeling truly rough for having done that, and thinking in that morning, why did I do that? This feels awful right now. But when I was 25, I didn't used to get hangovers from food. Like when I was 25, I just didn't notice it. Now, like I'm 36 and I eat certain foods, and in the morning I have a headache, as if I like been boozing the night before or something. I'm like, why have I? Oh, I ate, a junky pizza and a milkshake last night. That's why my head is hurting. So yeah, no, I'm on a path there, and I'm open to. If you have any resources that you think you should point me towards, I'm open to them.
I wonder if the tendency to binge is in any way related neurobiologically to the tendency that we sometimes feel to text an ex or do something in the realm of relationships that we know we shouldn't be doing.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think at a certain point, it's all chemicals in the brain, right? It's all, dopamine or chasing something. And so it's, I think probably most of the kind of vices and things over the years that might have given me spikes, I think I don't have those. And I've given up most things, and what's left is like pizza.
Pizza's pretty good. Pizza's pretty good. I love a good pizza. Tell us, walk us through your background, because I know you have this incredible body of work, and you are beloved by so many online and the people that you coach as well. But yeah, how'd you get started in this?
I was 11 years old when I first picked up the book How to Win Friends and Influence People. It was on my dad's bookshelf. Something about the title, I don't know, I can't remember if I was like, I looked at it and thought, well, it's kind of a funny title, or whether I genuinely saw it and thought, I want to learn how to win friends and influence people at 11 years old. But I picked it off the shelf and I read it and I was instantly hooked. And I think it spoke to a deep part of me, because I was introverted. I was also shy. And there was something something instantly revelatory to me about the idea that you weren't stuck with what you felt was your natural kind of state of being. Not that I could convert myself from an introvert to an extrovert, but that I could be better. I could be more confident. I could have more impact with people. I didn't have to just give in to my shy tendencies. And that there were better ways to be with people. You could become more competent in that area. That was like that for me, if you looked at light bulb moments in my life, that was a big one. And then that was like, that turned me onto like a journey of looking at the content of all that stuff and wanting to apply it to myself long before I ever thought I would want to do it as any kind of a career. I was just a teenager, but I couldn't get enough of it for myself. And it was helping me. It was working for me. I was, I found at school, I was more confident, even just talking to adults. I felt more confident. I was a DJ in my teens for 10 years. And, that it made me, I would apply what I was learning on the microphone, because the part of DJing that scared me the most was speaking on the microphone. The mixing was something that, I got good at, but then having to actually speak to the crowd was terrifying at first. And so I was applying it everywhere. And then my friend's dad, he would take his employees, this was back in England, he would take his employees to Tony Robbins every year. And one year he said to his son, who was my age at the time, I think we were about 15, he said, you can bring a friend, but you have to come. And so my friend came to me and was like, hey, my dad's dragging me to Tony Robbins. This guy, I was like, he didn't know that I already knew who Tony Robbins was. I had already been like, I'd seen some of these books because I was starting to like be in the orbit of these kinds of books. And I didn't act as excited as I was, but I took the ticket and I went, and it became the kind of marriage of, here's all the content you've been learning about. And now here's someone who is delivering it in I'd never seen anyone public speak like that. I'd never seen someone who could hold a crowd like that or could mesmerize a crowd like that. And that was another light bulb moment for me, because it just changed my standard for presentation at a very, very young age. Because I think a lot of us grow up with, our standard for presentation is our teachers at school. And suddenly I saw someone who was talking in front of 10,000 people in essentially an arena in London at the Excel Centre it was. And I thought, I cannot believe someone could be that powerful on stage. So it kind of created this excitement for me about the whole world of self-development, but I had nowhere to go with it. I didn't know what to do with that. And I ended up going to university for real estate and planning.
Wow.
My dad was a property developer at one point, and I don't know if I thought I was following in his footsteps or doing something that, I thought he would like me to do, or I don't know how much of it was my passion or his passion or, but I went, and while I was at university, I started traveling. I was at university in Reading, which is about half an hour from London. I started traveling from Reading to London to attend seminars. So I would go to like anything that was free, basically. So I saw a lot of like Holiday Inn conference centers and, people who were just come to this free 2-3 hour event. And, I'd sit there. And of course, at the moment where, they said, and we have this course, we had nothing to offer because I didn't even have a credit card at the time. But I would sit through all the free events, and I just kept trying to find like a back door. Like how do I be in this world somehow? And then I ended up meeting someone who was helping people in London with their love lives. And I started going to that event, and I was like, well, maybe I can like just be a helper. And I started being a helper. And then like gradually, people started actually coming to me for advice, because I was, like I said, I was shy, and I was what I was learning, I was applying to being a little braver in my own love life and to taking more risks. Because my whole childhood was, as a teenager, my love life was basically, if you came up to me and asked me enough times, I would end up being your boyfriend because I didn't have the guts or the confidence to go over to someone that I might really like. So I was like, I'm not doing that. So I just ended up being chosen by someone. Wow. And it got to a point where I was like, I don't want to live my whole life like this, where I feel like I'm being chosen and I'm not necessarily in a relationship I want to be in, but I'm too afraid to go and speak to the people that I really like. And that, when I learned the skill of being braver, it didn't mean I didn't have nerves or anything like that, but I suddenly was able to like get past that and be a bit braver, risk rejection, put myself out there. And so I started helping other people with that, firstly on a one-to-one basis, then groups. And then I started doing theaters in London for people that would come out to see me.
Wow.
And by this time I was 21 years old. And then I said, well, I had women coming to me saying, why aren't you doing the same thing for us? You seem to be doing this for guys, but why not do it for women too? And I had to I went away and did my homework, and I was like, well, then what's out there for women already? Because I feel like I don't, in my 21-year-old brain, I was like, what problem do women have in this area? Yeah. I now know very different. But back then I was like, it's so hard for us guys to go and talk to someone, but what's difficult about this for a woman? And obviously I was not capable of understanding everything that was tough about it for a woman at that age. But what I did start to realize was women weren't making the move, and their lives might be a lot better if they could be a bit more proactive than they were being. Because like me as a teenager, they were waiting to be chosen instead of going out there and doing the choosing. So I then started to help women specifically be a little braver in their love lives, take some more risks, take it into their own hands. And, that started what's now been a 16, 17 year journey where I wrote a New York Times bestseller, did a bunch of TV shows, built a YouTube following with 500 million views on the channel. And, everything now that I'm doing, which is kind of crazy. I used to identify as like the young pup in the room who I felt like I was always the youngest. And I was always like, people were forcing me to justify my age. How are you doing this so young? And I realized at some point in the last few years, I crossed over into no one asks me that anymore.
Yeah, at a certain point that stops. It's depressing, but man, your story is so relatable. I can relate so much to it. So wait, how did you begin then to cultivate the braveness? Where did that come from?
I think a big part of it was for me, I didn't want to live the rest of my life feeling like I was missing some kind of potential that I might have. Like that really bothered me. And so I started to get more uncomfortable with the idea that I had let an opportunity slide than I was with the idea of being rejected. And don't get me wrong, I hated being rejected. I wasn't like, there are some people out there who are like, oh, the rejections just bounce off me. I did not feel that. The rejection sucked, but I learned to have a real discomfort with the idea that there was someone I might have liked to talk to. And then I went home and didn't, and I would beat myself up for having not done it.
Like if you were at the supermarket and you saw somebody attractive and you just didn't have the courage to go up to them.
Yeah, it would bother me.
Yeah.
It would bother me going home that could have been something and I didn't even take the risk. I'll never know. And that started to haunt me. And by the way, like that wasn't always a positive thing either, right? Because if you carry that too much, then you just never relax. You every time you see someone that you think is attractive or that you might like to talk to, you're always beating yourself up if you didn't do something. But you can't. That's where my inner kind of something I've struggled with my whole life that I've had to do a lot of work on, that kind of inner tyrant that holds me to an impossible standard. That's where that part of me also came out, because rather than saying, you know what, it's okay to go into this, like sometimes with a feeling of like, yeah, don't waste the opportunity, go talk to that person. But you not every day has to be like that. And don't get me wrong, I was never like a giant party animal or anything like that. So it wasn't like I was constantly feeling this every hour of the day, but I would notice there were times where it wasn't productive to beat myself up about that, when it was perfectly reasonable that I didn't feel like doing that in that moment. But for sure it became something that for me generated a lot more opportunity in that part of my life. And if I'd have gone through my life never having learned that, it definitely would have put me in a very different place in my love life.
I'm sure so many people were shocked to hear you say that there was a point in your life where you didn't have the courage to approach somebody out in the wild. Because, I mean, good-looking guy, in the prime of their life. It makes me it actually reminds me of, we've had a few conversations on the show recently about the mental health crisis, and specifically how it's affecting boys and young men, and just how society lately over the past few decades has really kind of let down boys and young men from the just the standpoint of mental health, and how like support systems and that used to be in place are no longer, as society has sort of shifted away and adopted this attitude towards masculinity that seems to be really counterproductive.
What's like an example of that? I'm so curious. Like how, in what way, what was like a support system that boys used to have that they don't have now? Or is there what transition have you seen?
Well, it's just that masculinity used to be celebrated, or at the very least, not something that was seen as shameful. I mean, now, young boys are warned of the concept of, they're warned of embodying, what's referred to now as toxic masculinity. And I think that's really problematic. I mean, just the fact that term now not only exists, but has permeated the zeitgeist to the degree that young boys are familiar with it. I think that's a problem. It's not something that existed when I went to high school. Mm-hmm. Boys will be boys and girls were girls, and each gender was celebrated for their differences, and appreciated as such. And I think now it can be potentially difficult. I mean, obviously I don't know. I'm not in high school or elementary school, but rates of suicide among boys in their 20s are orders of magnitude higher than it is for girls.
And is the idea that they are taking their lives or harming themselves because they now are confused? Is it because they feel a sense of shame about parts of themselves that they've been told are just inherently bad, and then they judge themselves for that? What's the connection between the two?
Well, I think it's multifactorial. I think part of it has to do with the fact that boys are not given, from a young age, they're not given the vocabulary with which to express what's going on in their inner world. They're not, I think girls are more often asked to express how it is that they're feeling, mm-hmm. whereas boys are asked more to express what it is that they're doing. I think that there's a rise in fatherlessness. Or what Warren Farrell, who's an expert in this topic specifically, we've had him on the show. He's a great guest, brilliant expert. Dad deprivation, the failure of male role models to have a presence today in the lives of many boys. And then I think the media plays a role, the fact that they're growing up, there used to be the archetype in movies and on TV of really masculine, strong men. And now I think that those images are somewhat harder to come by. And so I think it leaves boys feeling, I guess, unmoored to some degree. And then of course all the usual stuff that's affecting everybody more broadly. Social media, I think, is playing a role. We're seeing a rise of body dysmorphia and eating disorders, body image issues in boys and men. And I think support for women in that regard has started to become more widely available, but I think it's an underappreciated phenomena in boys and men. So I don't know. I think it's multifactorial.
One of the, in a sense, my brain goes to this being almost a surprising conclusion in some ways, or a surprising connection, because I would almost imagine, when I think of being at school, in high school, definitely some of my moments of feeling great or feeling powerful were moments where I stepped into that very masculine energy. But that masculine energy was also responsible for many, many times where I felt not good, where I felt inadequate, or where I felt, scared, or where I felt in some way, like I was making comparisons that made me unhappy. It's funny because I would almost have imagined that having less emphasis on masculinity being where young boys' worth comes from would make space for boys to be either more of themselves or to be more accepting of where they're not the same as other people, where they're not the tallest guy in school, where they're not the strongest guy in school, where they're not the most athletic, but create a kind of wider range of ways that boys can feel accepted or worthy. So it's interesting, the idea that it goes the other way. That if you're kind of, maybe one would argue, if you're shaming masculinity, and that masculinity then in whatever form has nowhere to go, then that leaves people feeling unmoored, as you say, or it leaves them kind of not, denying some part of their nature. But I don't know. Often I feel like between men, women have to deal with men, and that's hard for women. But men also have to deal with men, and in a different way, and in a lesser way, but still in a very real way. Men have to deal with men.
Yeah.
And the effects of whatever you want to call it, whether it's toxic masculinity or just aggression, violence, the men also have to deal with that. And it creates a lot of misery in men's lives too.
Yeah. I mean, I think I think a lot of good has come from the sort of the redefining of masculinity, because you're right. I mean, like boys are different. Like, it's, I, for example, never fit into the stereotypical image of what a strong, masculine boy was, because I was never an athlete. Mm-hmm. Like, I wasn't into sports. I was more into art and music and computers and the internet and stuff like that. But it's similar, I guess, in the same way that the Me Too movement in many ways was great and needed, to disinfect a lot of the mistreatment of women in various industries, but particularly Hollywood, which is where it began. But I think that movement also, there was a dark side to that movement where suddenly it left men feeling scared to express their masculinity. And you saw a lot of people being shamed and ostracized for behaviors that weren't necessarily as pathologic as like the Harvey Weinsteins of the world, So yeah, I mean, it's obviously a complicated issue, but I think part of the complex that has left men feeling maybe more uncomfortable today is the fact that they're being told all of these different and opposing messages about what it means to be a man.
Yeah, well, that for sure, it's become confusing, I think.
Yeah.
I think, and the different factions that seem to have spun off from that confusion is like true, like it's a strange world right now. I wasn't even aware of like communities that are now online and the things they believe until the last year or two. I just didn't know. I didn't get it. I didn't understand where what, when people would say things, I was like, that's not really a thing, is it? Like, people believe that? Or people, it just didn't. I was really surprised. And then you dig into those worlds and you realize, wow, there's a lot going on right now.
Yeah.
And things in terms of what people have, conclusions people have come to.
Yeah. It can be very confusing. So given all that today in the 21st century, 2024, as we record this, how do we find love? What is the solution, It's a very complicated world. Social media is complicated. Relationships today are complicated. Set us on the right path, Matthew.
The Mitch album had a quote that was, I think it's, if you don't like the culture, you have to create your own. And I think that that's so very true in people's love lives, is that there might be cultural shifts in some ways. Certainly we know there is when it comes to technology. And, you know, if you were married for the last 20 years and now you come out into a world of dating apps, that alone is a scary proposition, and it's just overwhelming and intimidating. But, you know, if what feels like an increased flakiness, or people being less willing to settle down, which I hear all the time, that just general, the way people show up to dating or what they think is acceptable. But I really believe that if we're not careful, we end up getting sucked into the culture in a way that just makes us part of it. And then we end up playing kind of the same game everyone else is. It feels like, you know, being, you know, early on in dating, having a kind of cool indifference and not overplaying your hand, or being very, you know, texting someone incessantly on an app and it never really goes anywhere, but 3 weeks later you're still writing back and forth. Like, you can get sucked into that game if you buy into the culture and if you take the culture too seriously. But if instead you say, what is it, like, what's the culture I want to have? It's not unlike creating a business, right? What makes a business stand out is when it has a very strong culture and a very strong brand. And it says, well, everyone's been doing things this way, but actually what our company stands for is this. And then it creates something fresh and different. And the content is the same. You know, we live in a world that's saturated with content. How do you stand out? Well, one of the ways you stand out with content is by being the youest you. And the more of yourself, your thumbprint you can put on it, the more likely people are going to there's going to be a certain kind of person that really vibes with what you're doing and sees you as the person they want to follow, they want to watch every week. And you won't find everyone, but you'll find your people. And that's, to me, that's also what we have to do in dating, is say, what's the culture I want to represent? What's the culture I want to have? And then be really connected to that and your reasons for doing it, and lead with that culture. You know, I was speaking to literally a woman today, one of my members, who she was saying, like, I get very anxious in the early stages because I don't know, you know, when they're texting me, or when they're like, they call me infrequently, or I don't really know if they really like me. You know, I don't know if the messages or the calls they're making show any real intentionality. I'm just, you know, I'm not sure. And my wife Audrey pointed out, like, well, look, what is the intentionality behind what they're sending you? Are they calling you at the end of a long day to, like, check in with your day, or see, like, how was your day? Mine was insane. Let me tell you about it. Like, are they doing that? Or are they sending you a message at some point in the evening just being like, hey, what's going on? You know, what's the level of intentionality? But what I said, to take it even one step further than that, is being aware of who's a good bet is being in tune with how intentional they are being. But true leadership is leading with the kind of intentionality that you would like to see from somebody else. So now you're the person who's maybe had a busy day. You know, you've been in your flow, you're feeling pretty good, you're about to go into your evening, maybe you're going to go meet some friends, but you've got half hour, and you pick up the phone and you call that person that you had a great date with at the end of last week, and you ask them how their day was. Hey, I'm on my way somewhere, but I wanted to check in. Thought it'd be fun to hear your voice. Like, what's been going on? How's your day? Like, that sends a kind of message to that person. It's more than just, oh, this person's calling me. It would be okay to call them. You're giving me a green light to meet you at that level. Now, not everyone will, of course. And in a sense, the more you lead with your culture, the more you will quickly be able to distinguish between people who can match that culture and live up to it and people who can't. It becomes a filter that actually can get rid of the wrong people quicker when you do that. But it also, there are people that may not have your culture right now, but they see that culture and they're like, you know what, actually, this is kind of cool. Like no one has, you know, I had a friend of mine I just was with the other week, and I asked him and his partner how they met. And she was like, well, we went on this like quick date before we went out with our friends. But then afterwards, you know, we went for a drink, then we parted ways. He went out with his friends afterwards. And then 2 hours later, when he got home, he called me and he was like, is it weird that I'm calling you? It was their first date, you know, the first time they'd ever met. But he called her 2 hours later when he got home from his friends, and he was like, is it weird that I'm calling you right now? And she was like, no, I actually love it. Now, she wouldn't have called him 2 hours later because in her mind, it was like, you know, I couldn't do that. But he created a little culture where that was actually okay. It wasn't weird. And he was testing in a way, like not consciously, but he was like, are you with me? Like, is this normal for you? Because I kind of want to do this. I feel like we had a good drink and I now want to just say hi, even though I'm at home. It's not like he was trying to get anything. Like he wasn't trying to get her to come over at 10 o'clock, but he was just like, I thought I'd call you. And because of that, he found someone who vibed with that, not someone who didn't pick up the phone and was like, instead sent a text and went, hello, did you mean to call? You know, she picked up the phone. So that's what I mean by it is the Wild West out there. It is kind of chaotic. You are going to come across tons of the wrong people. You are going to come across tons of really strange behavior. But if you get really set on the kind of culture that you want to represent and create, you go into leadership mode in your love life instead of passively waiting for someone to come along and model the culture you want. And that's the difference, by the way. A lot of people struggle in their love lives because they're constantly mirroring. And mirroring in some ways is a safe strategy because it says, I'm going to give what they give. And I'm even someone who said that in the past. I still believe it, that one of the greatest rules you can follow in your love life is invest in someone not based on how much you like them. Invest in them based on how much they invest in you.
Yeah, match their energy.
Yeah, it's a good rule for survival. But it's also, if you're not careful, if you blanket apply that rule from the beginning, then you're only ever mirroring. You're never modeling. Modeling is, let me model what I'd like to see from them, see if they can mirror that, and if they can't, then I'm going to mirror their lack of investment. But at some point, someone has to model something more, or no one would ever move. You just have two people standing on opposite sides of the dance floor at a school disco, both wishing that the other one would do something, and both ones saying, I'm going to invest as much as they do.
Yeah, that can get frustrating. You want to be upfront with your intentions.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned, it's a great way to weed out people who aren't playing on the same field as you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, really powerful advice. Tell me about, like, you mentioned at the top, you went through heartbreak, or you were going through heartbreak yourself as you were writing this book, or and chronic physical pain as well.
I wrote this book over a number of years. So this wasn't, sometimes people get a book deal and they then decide, okay, for the next year or two, I'm going to write this book. I was writing this book long before I ever, I wrote my first book. That became a New York Times bestseller. I then was like, I never want to do that again. That was so much work. I'm done. And I went away and I just, I got lost in my programs and coaching people and my retreats. And I just, I loved that. But I got to a point where I was like, I want to start writing again. But I did it kind of without my publisher even knowing, because they were desperate for me to do another book. But I didn't want the pressure of them thinking that like they'd sign me for another book deal and then it become a horrible exercise in trying to meet the clock. So for many years, I was chipping away at this book. But what that meant was it happened over a very long arc in my life. And there are chapters in this book that were written from a place of deep, deep heartbreak. Like some of the worst of my life. There were chapters written from a place of just being single and being like, you know, I'm not finding my person. And there were the final edit that I did of this book, I did on my honeymoon. So it was like, this book has seen me. This was not a book written by a married person. This was a book written by someone who had at some point identified with every stage of the process while writing it. I even had a moment in New York where I you know, every few years I'll do a tour, and I was on stage touring in New York, and someone asked a question from the audience. I can't remember what they said, but basically my answer started by me saying, I get it. Like, it's tough being single sometimes. Like, I'm single. I you know, I get what you're saying. And then I meant that to be a throwaway comment, but someone in the audience went, and this, by the way, was in a 1,500 person audience. So someone in the audience went, why are you single? And then I tried to move. I laughed. Ha, ha, ha.
Gotta love a heckler.
Yeah. And then I tried to move on, and someone else on the other side of the room went, wait, why are you single? And I laughed again, and I was like, all right. And then I started to move on. And then it was like the audience in unison started like chanting, why are you single? They like, from every corner, people just started asking. They would not let me move past it. So like, that's a very weird position to be in, to be on stage and to be helping people with this part of their lives, and to find myself single and being like, well, now I feel like, you know, there's something so meta about the whole thing. You want to live your life almost in a vacuum where you can just go and let it be organic. But instead you have all these people chiming in and asking you, you know, and by the way, that's a real reflection of a lot of people's lives. Anyway, when someone goes to the home to the Thanksgiving table and someone's like, why are you still single? Like, why haven't you met someone yet? What's going on? When are you going to settle down? And if there's some part of you that's like, I don't know, if I had the answer to that, like maybe it would help me. But right now, I don't know why I'm saying, it hasn't happened for me. You know, this is a tough part of our lives. It's an area where we don't have the same control that we feel like we have in other areas. You know, if you want to change your body and you go to the gym every day and you eat well, your body's going to change. It's a certainty. If you want more money in the bank, then you keep depositing money in that account. It's going to get bigger. But our love life is not the same. You can go on a date every night of the week for the next 6 months. It doesn't mean that you're going to have found the love you want in 6 months. It's not like, if it were a game, it wouldn't be Monopoly where you're like collecting houses and building up your bank account and, you know, gradually just getting more and more powerful. It'd be like Chutes and Ladders where you like climb a ladder and it's painstaking to get up there, and then at the end of it, someone dumps you or cheats on you or leaves you or whatever. And, you know, you find yourself like just shoot all the way down to where you were before, or even further back, it feels like, because now I'm older. Now I feel even more invisible. Now I feel it's even harder. Now I don't even have single friends to go out with because all of my friends are married. So I feel even more isolated than before. Maybe my friends are not even in the city anymore. They've moved out to places where they have more space. So here I am stuck in this place where I feel like it's getting harder and harder. My options are getting less. I'm more scared. I'm starting to get concerned that I'm broken and that something is wrong with me. I'm worried it's never going to happen for me, because on what basis do I think that this thing that hasn't happened my entire adult life so far is suddenly going to happen in the next 10 or 20 years? And for a lot of people, finding love is the most important thing that's like the thing that they want the most. And that's not just true of people who aren't career driven. It's true of many, many people who reach a point where they go, I want more. And when you get to that point, it's a very, very, it's a hard place to be, because people are often shamed for wanting love. They're shamed for like talking about it too much, lest we be desperate. Shamed for trying too hard, lest you stop being yourself. Just be yourself. When the time is right, it will happen for you. And you're like, but it hasn't happened. And I really want it to happen, but you don't feel like you can say that, because you feel like there's something wrong with you if you say it. And so people are shamed a lot for talking about wanting this thing. If someone said, I want to get this promotion, if someone said, I want to build this business, we're celebrated. But I really want to find love. It doesn't carry the same connotation. And that's a shame, because it's something we all want. It's hard out there, and it deserves massive compassion. And there are better ways to do it. If we know how, there are better ways to do it. And I wrote this book because I wanted to help people, give compassion to themselves for the place they're in right now, for why it is at this point in their life they haven't found what they're looking for, and to stop judging themselves for that and stop thinking that they're broken, because you're not, and to understand, to view yourself holistically, that you may have just been very unlucky. The person who thought they were all set because they were in a relationship, and then that person just left, and they're like, oh my God, I never thought I'd be single again at this point in my life. You might have got terribly unlucky. There's other people that have had hard battles to fight. They grew up in a certain way that really pre-programmed them to have a hard time trusting, have a hard time being attracted to healthy love, thinking that unhealthy love was real love, having patterns that are really, really hard to break. That compassion is everything. Then there's, what do we do next? How do we manage what feels like a chronic pain when we're single and we don't want to be? How do you manage that pain? And how do you find some happiness on the road to finding love? And how do you also find love a lot faster than you would, in this case, if you never read this book, or if I hadn't talked to you about what I've seen over the last 17 years. So that's kind of what this is about. It's for people who want to find love and want to figure out what would be a way to do love better going forward.
I love it. What was your self-talk like in those moments when you felt you were most lonely and desperate for love?
It was hard, honestly, because I remember having this idea of, I wrote this in the book. And by the way, I joke in the book that I'm the last person to ever tell you about a dream that I had. Like, it's just not like my wife, Audrey, when she wakes up and says, I had the craziest dream, she laughs at the fact that I don't ask a follow-up question. I'm not like, what was it? I'm like, I don't care. I don't care what the dream was. It didn't happen. But I had a dream, I remember, at college, where I was in an elevator with someone, and it just, this person that was next to me was like, I don't know why, they were just the love of my life. And it was like we were trying to escape from danger. This elevator was descending from some horrible danger above, and that we were going to escape together. And I genuinely had this feeling. I didn't even see this person's face. It was like me kind of looking at the back of their head, but holding their hand. And I remember having this feeling of, oh my God, this is my person. And the elevator doors opened, the light poured in, and I woke up. It was like nothing happened in the dream. It was almost like it was just a feeling. And I remember waking up and having this instant heartbreak of like, wait, where are they? Like, I'm awake and they don't exist. Like, it was a feeling that I knew, like, it was like, oh, that's how I want to feel. And for me, in my times being single, that feeling of wanting to feel that and not having that was like a real absence. And by the way, let me give it to people straight, because I don't want people thinking also like I'm some sob story when I was single. I also hurt a lot of people when I was single. I dated like a bit of an addict. And, for me, dating was about spikes and distraction and novelty, and it, I have huge regrets about hurting people in that time in my life, because I'm like, there were times where I look back and I'm like, man, I was not careful with that person's heart. Like, I should not have kept seeing that person knowing they wanted more than I did. Or I shouldn't have been dating multiple people at the same time in the way that I was, where I wasn't just completely transparent about it. I look back on those things, and I don't look back with any sense of pride. I look back and I'm like, man, I could have done a lot better there. That was me in a pattern that was unhealthy for me, harming other people. And that only, like, that contributed more to my unhappiness, because I wasn't giving myself the ability to go and, truly have the kind of relationship that I wanted. I wasn't even, by the way, giving myself to those people in that way. You know what I mean? Like, I wasn't even available for that kind of thing. I told myself I was, but I wasn't really. It's not that I was like, all the people that I dated were horrible people. And they were awesome people, but I just was not, something was going on with me that wasn't ready in that way, was still addicted to that high of dating, and was trying to kind of run away from something. I was never really being vulnerable. I thought I was being vulnerable. I wasn't being vulnerable. Like, I think for a long time I didn't realize that I didn't truly open up with people. Like, if you'd have asked me 10 years ago, are you a vulnerable person? I would have been like, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
I tell people about myself. People know about my past. People know, but that's not the same thing, Like, it's not, being vulnerable isn't telling some heroic story about your life. Like, we have it all, of course, all the time online these days. Like, people tell the hero's journey story of, this is where I started and this is where I am now. And the start point is always something, tragic and sad and difficult. And which, by the way, I'm not minimizing that. But when you tell a story from 15 years ago about how it was really hard back then and you got through it all and now you are who you are today, that's not a vulnerable story. That's a story of you being awesome. And I realized that my stories were not vulnerable stories. They were stories about me being awesome. Vulnerability is a different thing, because vulnerability is the thing you're terrified to say because you think people might not think that it's awesome.
Right.
They might hear that and go, not for me. Or, that's a counterbalance to this other part of you that I've seen that's very, very kind and, loving and does the right thing. And, this is the thing I'm worried that if I talk to you about this, you're going to judge me for, or you're going to shame me for, because I'm already shaming myself for it. And, that I didn't realize the extent to which, as a man, I didn't bring those details forward. It took me, until in many ways, my current, my wife now to truly open up in those ways and to realize, oh my God, to what extent did anyone actually truly know me? Like, I kept telling myself I was myself, but I was a version of myself I wanted other people to see. And I think that's true of so many people. That's true who can't relate to, sending their representative to their love life to do their bidding and to create the impression. And who isn't afraid among us that at some point they're going to figure out, I am not as confident as I have been making out. Who's not afraid that one day that, like, what they think of as their crazy side, that, you get triggered because someone went on a night out and now you're freaking out because it reminds you of some other time that someone went on a night out and it didn't go well for you because they cheated or they did something that you had to find out, and it's freaking you out. And, after, you realize that barrage of messages and phone calls you just left someone who didn't call you for an hour has brought out a side of you they've never seen before. And now you're freaking out because you're ashamed and you're like, you're not going to love me anymore now that you've seen that side of me. Who hasn't got that? But for me, when I look back on that time being single, I I realized how much of those things I held back and how much work I still had to do in accepting myself and those parts of me. Because I think that's one of the reasons we struggle so much in dating. I have the stories people tell me when I'm coaching them about how do I bring this up? How do I talk about the fact that I was in this kind of a relationship before? How do I share with them this detail about my life? And what it really is there's so much shame around it themselves that it's like I can't let that out, because they're going to see my shame and then they're going to validate that once they know that, they don't want me anymore. And a lot of the work I do with people is helping people integrate those parts of themselves and their story to a place where they can actually be proud and where they can actually accept and love those parts of their life, their story, even integrate their mistakes or their regrets or the things they wish they'd done differently in their life. Because when you've done that, the way you show up on a date is completely different. The same as the way that I would show up to this conversation on this show is very different if I hadn't accepted parts of myself. Because what I'm really thinking is, I hope they don't talk about that. I hope Max isn't going to ask me about this. I hope it doesn't see this part of me. That's a reflection of things that I haven't integrated yet, I haven't accepted yet, I haven't made my own peace with. And it's why I think so many people go into their love lives as half of themselves. And then sad that they never find the kind of connection they're really looking for, or they never find the acceptance that they're really looking for from another person. But the truth is, how well does anyone out there dating you ever really know you?
Yeah, I mean, and have you found that when you're willing to expose those parts of yourself that you might be unsure of, that it tends to deepen the connection?
Sometimes. And sometimes it turns people off. And that's the thing we have to be ready for. That's why accepting those parts of ourselves is really, really important, as much as we can do it going in. Because like I was in a relationship where I said something that I was really afraid to say, an insecurity that I was really afraid to say. And this person looked at me and said, "That's really unattractive."
Wow. And
it crushed me. Like I was living with my friend at the time, and I walked across the hall to my friend's room, and I was beside myself. I was so upset. I was so hurt. And I was also so angry. But I wasn't even angry at this person. I was angry at myself. I was like, what were you thinking? What, you knew better? Why would you say that? Why would you, of course this person's unattracted to you now. It is ugly. This is pathetic. Why did you say that out loud? You should have fucking buried that. Why did you? And, I remember going to speak to my friend and just being like, why did I say that? And it gives you, all these moments in my life give me such insight into how people go to the extremes. Especially men, right? Why do men go to the extremes? Why do they, go to a place where they hate women, or where they suddenly they have so much anger? And I go, well, for a moment there, I felt that. For a moment there, I shut up shop. I was like, I am never doing that again.
Do you have any understanding now around why what you said was perceived as unattractive? I kind of want to know what you said.
But I think this person was not, I think that they weren't in a space where they were able to handle that kind of, what's the word? A whole person, I think that, it really, looking back, it confirmed for me, I felt like in that relationship, I felt like I constantly had to be something in order to be with this person. And I think a lot of people do that. They play a character, which doesn't mean that the thing they're playing isn't them sometimes, but they're playing it all the time because they're worried that if they were anything else, this person wouldn't want them. And that, even that attracts an unhealthy kind of love, or it doesn't attract a complete love, a deeper connection, because that person's never really seeing those other sides of you. And if they're not seeing those other sides of you, you also have to ask the question, why doesn't it bother them that they're not seeing those other sides of you? You know what I mean? Like if you've done, you know what it's like? If you've done a lot of work on yourself and you've come to a place of acceptance of your own flaws and you've been honest with yourself about the things you struggle with and you've made space for all the parts of yourself, then when you talk to other people, you are much more attuned to whether someone else is being their whole self. And I know the friends I make today are people that when I meet them and spend time with them, I'm like, that's a real person. That, you know, I can see their power, I can see how awesome they are, but I also, they've accepted themselves enough that what they're giving me is so authentic. The energy they're giving me, the way they're talking is so authentic. And those people are the people that I vibe with really quickly these days, because when I'm around someone who's inauthentic, it just registers very clearly. You know, when you're being inauthentic, you kind of end up attracting inauthentic people and you vibe with each other.
Yeah.
But the more authentic you become, the more you realize it's no shame on that person, because that's just where they are in their path. But you just realize someone who's not being all of themselves with you, or maybe even with themselves. And so I think that I attracted someone who wasn't, you know, it shouldn't have been enough for this person that I wasn't more of myself, right? That 2D version of me shouldn't have been enough.
Right.
So the fact that I almost shouldn't have been surprised when I brought more of that forward, that it was not received well, because that in some ways that should have been an issue earlier, that I hadn't shown more of myself. And for me, I had to, you know, unfortunately it validated this deep fear I had at the time that you shouldn't be that vulnerable. You know, like, okay, Brene Brown's work's really important, but like there's a limit as a guy. You don't want to be that vulnerable, because, you know, you're going to become instantly unattractive. And it took me some time to start to be vulnerable again. And, you know, then, you know, I found other kind of corrective relationships. Like therapy was a very corrective relationship, because it was a place where I felt vulnerable and I wasn't judged for it. I wasn't, you know, I was afraid, you know, well, this is going to make this therapist not like me. And then when you realize like they're like, they've seen it all.
They've seen it all, yeah.
You're like, oh, maybe this isn't as bad as I'd convinced myself, or like, God, I've really turned this into a monster in my head, and actually out loud, this is something else, and I've given it too much power. I think you can find that in friendships. You can find it, if you're lucky, in certain family relationships. But certainly when I met Audrey, I felt, you know, that was a very healing thing for me, because as she made space for me to speak more of the things that, you know, I thought were the not lovable parts of me, and then she received them with acceptance and love and didn't leave. That was like, oh, this is, not only is this the most beautiful gift anyone has ever given me, but this is modeling the kind of acceptance that I can give to myself. And I really think, like, we're all screwed up in different ways, and we all have things that we regret or are ashamed of, or whether it's something from 5 years ago or 10 years ago or something from last week. You know, we all have those things. I go to bed at night torturing myself over something I said to someone that day. Okay, I feel like I hurt that person's feelings today. And then I'm torturing myself over that thing that I said. And, you know, it's a constant process of integrating those parts of ourselves and applying a compassionate lens to those things. And that's been something that I've worked very hard on. And a huge amount of this book is the tools that I've learned along the way that I've passed on to many, many thousands of people, both online and in my retreats every year. I think one of the coolest things about this book is that there are things I've never said outside of my retreat program that have made their way into this book, because as much as I want people to come and join me on my retreat program, it felt too important to leave out. And so some of the tools that I came to and arrived at for self-love and self-acceptance are, I believe, some of the most powerful chapters in this whole book. Because they're also a bit counterintuitive. Like, my take on self-love, I think, is quite different from a lot of what we hear out there today, which I think is very misguided around that subject.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's from what I've seen of it, it's a phenomenal book. People should definitely check it out. I'm curious, how did you meet Audrey?
We were at a friend's engagement party in London. I wasn't even living in London. I was living in LA. I went home for Christmas, and I was only home for a few weeks. And a friend of mine invited me to, it's not even a friend I'd see regularly. I was home and he said, do you want to come to my engagement party? It was at a pub in London. And I said yes. And on my way there, I was being driven there by another friend of mine. And this other friend of mine said, there's this girl there that that all the other boys are in love with. And we're all afraid you're going to steal her. And I laughed, but instantly I had this feeling of, I wonder who he's talking about. And then when I walked in, I saw this person, I saw her energy, and she was gorgeous. And I was like, I think that's who they're talking about. And there was a big fight on that night. I think it was like Anthony Joshua was fighting that night. But I was like, I genuinely didn't want to be at this party. And I really wanted to be at home watching the boxing. And I think I was standing there watching the fight. And she kind of like, we were looking at each other a lot. And then she ended up kind of being close to me, and she asked me a question about the boxing and how it all worked, which is not something she's ever done since. She's never shown a slightest bit of interest in boxing since that day. But we started talking, and we ended up talking till like the early hours of the morning, like just talked and talked and talked and talked. So yeah, that was how we met.
Amazing.
And it's really funny because I had been saying for years, just constantly droning on about that thing you say yes to, that you could have not, it would have been easy not to go, or that person you say hi to that it would have been easy to not say anything. The ability for women to just, as I would used to call it, drop the handkerchief, so that a guy can talk to you. Like, I really believed in these things. I was like, life is so crazy. The tiniest moment can have the biggest impact on your life. How many of those tiny moments are you making possible? Either by the times that you leave the house or the moments where you decide to do something instead of nothing. There is no such thing as a, perfect or, extraordinary line to say to someone when you first meet them. It's just how many, like atoms colliding, like how many times are you getting the atoms to collide in your life? And nothing can happen if you don't get the atoms to collide. So it doesn't matter what you say. You can say, is the coffee good here? I feel like the coffee's amazing here. It doesn't matter. It's like you just gave a chance. You created a moment for atoms to collide. And, when I look back on that, I can't tell you how easy it would have been for me to not go that night. Like, I didn't want to go. And I just thought, oh, fine, I'll go. And I'm married now as a result of saying yes to going that evening. That truly blows my mind. Because there wouldn't have been another moment. Like, it's not, I don't hang out with that group. So it's not like, I would have seen her 3 months later anyway. I wouldn't have. We just wouldn't have met. So it really does blow my mind, the things that can come out of these tiny, tiny moments in our lives.
As a love and relationship expert, I mean, do you ever struggle even today to practice what you preach?
I think we all struggle when we get triggered. Like, I think that's always the real test, right? When you get triggered, how do you respond to that? Because that's the moment everyone can stand. Well, anyone can stand on stage or in a session and talk about great ideas. But when you're the one who gets triggered and it's your stuff that's been triggered, that's, to me, when you kind of show that you're legit, that you can really and by the way, there's no easy answer to that, right? It's not easy for anyone. Whatever is your trigger is hard for you. So there is no easy when you get triggered, when something needles at something from your past or something that's just your button. But do you know in that moment how to regulate your nervous system? Do you know how to slow down your response time? Do you understand the structure of a better response that leads to, a 5-minute conversation instead of a 1 hour or a 3 hour argument that leads to 3 days of being cold with each other? Like, these things matter. And by the way, even when you argue, it's like, what's your recovery time? Because to me, success is I find ways to get triggered less often. And when I do get triggered, my recovery time, it keeps improving. That's a measure of success. It's not that it never happens. And it's, I don't really, this stuff is deep and it's hard to budge. It takes time and it takes rewiring. And some things may in some way be there for the rest of our lives. But how often is it happening compared to how often it happened 5 years ago? And when it does happen, how quickly are you able to regulate and get back to a good place? Or how quickly after an argument are the two of you able to return to a beautiful place? That's something me and my wife Audrey have gotten really, really good at. It's not that we never fight. It's just that our recovery times are really, really good. And when I look at, when I look at other times in my life, even going back to childhood, I remember a moment where I was playing, I had friends over and two of my best friends over at my house. Me, my brothers, them, we were all playing in the garden, just playing football. And I can't remember what happened, but something happened. My mum came out, screamed at me, I think, for something. I think I got embarrassed. Something happened. And it triggered me. I don't know why, but it triggered me. And the only feeling I can remember is shame and embarrassment. And my reaction to that shame and embarrassment was to go up to my room and slam the door and essentially end my presence in that day. Be like, no one's coming in, screw you all. And people would come and knock, one by one. My brother came up, my best friend came up, my mum came up, knocked on the door. Matt, come out. It's like, everyone's having a good time downstairs. Everyone's having a nice time. Come back, come. And it was in my way, it was my punishment was, no, I'm not leaving. Screw, go away. I'm going to ignore you. And meanwhile, everyone was having a nice time downstairs. I'm the one stuck in my room, isolated on my own. And at one point, my brother came up and said, "Hey, we're all going to Alex's." My best friend at the time. We're all going to Alex's. We're gonna we had to sleep over at ours the night before. We're all gonna go and sleep over Alex's tonight. Carry on. And I dug my heels in and I was like, "You guys go." And they went. And my mum was like, "Last chance, Matt. They're leaving now. Go on, please go. Go have a good time with them." And I was like, "No, I'm not going." And I didn't go. And I stayed home on my own that night while everyone else went. And the next morning, I will never forget, because my brothers came home, and they were raving about the movies they watched and the things they did and how fun it was and the games they played. And my stomach like was in knots, because I could just hear on this really fun time that I missed out on, because I pushed everyone away. And my response to embarrassment and to shame was to shut everyone out and to distance myself. And I, you know, it kind of haunted me a little bit, because I was like, I can never have that night. Like, that fun night with my friends and my brothers was a night I wasn't part of. Like, it was a really fun and pure and beautiful time. And no one hurt me but myself. Like, no one did that to me. Everyone was trying to get me to come play. And I shut myself out. And like broke my own heart in the process. That's like, that could have been the story of my whole life. That could have been me forever. I could have just, and by the way, I can look at plenty of times in my adult life where that reaction that looks like, you know, as a kid, it's almost funny. It's like, oh my God, why? Like, it's so silly and whatever. But I can look at my 20s and see no shortage of times where that part of me was activated, and I did exactly the same thing in my own, you know, adult way, 20-something way. And I don't do that anymore, you know? I can see it coming. I can see that feeling coming if it comes, and it comes in less situations. But when it does, I can see it coming, and I can just express it, or I can say out loud, this has hurt me, and I think this is why. And whoever's with me, if they love me, and, you know, I'm surrounded by people I love who care about me, and usually it's Audrey, and, you know, I can say this hurt me, and she can be with me, and then within 5 minutes I feel good again. And I didn't shut myself in my room for 24 hours and miss the party as a result. So that's, you know, I don't think anyone should ever beat themselves up if they continue. One of the really, I think, nasty kind of myths is this idea that like all of these triggers go away and you're not going to feel these things anymore. And I've always thought some of them won't go away. You know, some of them may stick around, but you don't need them to go away to be happy. You just need to know, you need to be able to see them coming, how to react to them, improve your recovery time. And gradually, as you change your relationship with that part of you, it might actually start to decrease to a level that barely registers anymore. It's why the last chapter of this book I call Happy Enough, because happy enough is, for me, I really love happy enough as a phrase. I think it's really powerful. It's kind of it's a powerful place to be, because it doesn't set the expectation at something impossible. It says like where you are or what you've arrived at is enough for you in some way. And far from being a cop-out or like settling, I actually think of it as a powerful foundation on which to strike. Because if you're happy enough, you know, if you're happy enough with yourself or your life, you can actually say no to someone who's treating you badly. If you're not happy enough, then you'll say yes to anything.
Yeah, it's a good target. That's a powerful lesson. You can't control the triggers, but you can control your response to them. And I so relate to that. I was one of those stubborn little kids as well, often to my own detriment. Yeah. Wow. I feel like I've definitely had experiences just like that. Wild. But yeah, they're not so common anymore, which I guess I'm grateful for. What is what is an ideal, I guess this is a more fun question. What is an ideal date night for you and Audrey?
It's probably so boring to everyone else.
People want to know.
I mean, we're kind of homebodies. So we're like, for us, getting to do, like, truly being able to do nothing. And because we both work really, really hard, like, it is sacred for us, the idea of, like, we just get to lay on the sofa and, like, order food and watch a show, like binge a show or watch a movie. That's up there for us as a ideal date night. Am I missing? She's in the background. Am I missing it? What do you, it's not boring to us. We love it. But what would be, oh, you know what? Like going for like great sushi.
Yeah.
Going to like a really good sushi restaurant would be a really big date night for us. Like, you know.
What do you like in LA?
Oof. Sushi bar in LA is pretty good.
Never been.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
I love sushi.
Where else?
That place we went to on La Cienega.
Oh,
Matsuhisa?
no.
Oh.
Where else on La Cienega? I'm trying to think. We'll always hunt for like wherever the best sushi is. Uchi, I think, is a new one, right? That just arrived in LA from Austin or somewhere like that. But we're, like going and having like great sushi, especially if it's like an omakase menu and like a sake pairing to go with it. Like that's like a great date night for us.
I love
the cinema. Yeah, we're cinema junkies, so we'll always be happy. Like we can't go to like a we're like, it's dangerous for us to walk through the doors of a cinema and just smell the popcorn and then like immediately be hooked. So the cinema, we're also nerdy. We'll like love to go to Disney and just like spend a day at Disney World. Even if we don't do any rides, just like a great date day for us is just strolling. Just like walking around, having no plan, nothing to do, just eating food and, and being kids. I think there's a great deal of escapism in it for us too, because sometimes everything just feels like a lot. And it feels, I don't know, work can feel very overwhelming at times, especially in this cycle. My God, it just feels insane right now. So I think we're like dreaming of our next vacation, somewhere we can just go and be together. Yeah.
I get it. So fun. Love that. Well, thanks for coming in, man. Great to get to know you. And I feel like I relate so much to your story. And it's cool. It's cool finding a kindred spirit, in this crazy world, in this crazy life.
It's the best.
Yeah.
Right? It's like the best feeling. That what you just articulated is literally for me, one of the most like transcendent feelings in the world. It kind of, in some ways, to bring it full circle, like that, if someone said to me, like, what's the mission of this book? It would be to help people find love, whether it's with themselves or, with another person. But my deeper mission, for me, it's like even more basic, is just to help people feel less alone. And that what you just articulated is, for me, one of the greatest pressure valves for feeling alone is when you find someone in the world who you feel like there's something about this person that I get, that I relate to. It's the best. I feel the same way. So I appreciate you saying it. Yeah. Dude.
Well, we'll have to get around to it at some point. And I'm looking forward to have to I guess double date at some point, because your boy has been in a relationship for the past 4 or 5 months for the first time in a very long time.
Nice.
So
nice.
Yeah.
Well, I look forward to hearing that story.
Yeah, that is a story.
Yeah.
We'll save it for the round 2. But people should definitely go and check out Love Life. I'm super excited, and I hope it does really well. And I've just got one last question for you. But before we get to that, where can people find you on social media? Where can they pick up your book?
So you'll find me if you just put my name into Instagram or Facebook or TikTok or YouTube. We're across all those platforms. But the book is called Love Life: How to Raise Your Standards, Find Your Person, and Live Happily No Matter What. I'm very, very proud of it. I truly believe that everyone is going to get so much from it. There's chapters for everyone in there. There's a chapter on heartbreak for anyone who's heartbroken. There's an entire chapter, 2 chapters on confidence for anyone who's struggling with deeper confidence and self-love. There's a chapter on how to leave a difficult relationship if you're struggling with being able to leave. There's chapters on having hard conversations if you're trying to figure out how to articulate your thoughts to someone and you're scared of how to do it. There's chapters on how to rewire yourself if you feel like you keep driving towards the wrong things, or you feel like you're never satisfied, and you just live in constant doubt of whether you're choosing the right thing. It's a very, very comprehensive book. And if you go to lovelifebook.com, not only can you order a copy of the book there through whatever retailer you want, all the links are there, but when you get your receipt, come back to that page and put your receipt into the page, because we have an event on May 4th called Find Your Person. And it's going to be a big virtual online event that I'm really excited about. We're really going to it's going to be a great pairing with the book. I'm going to be there. My wife, Audrey, is going to be there. We're going to be, talking, coaching, bringing people on live. It's just going to be a really, really fun experience, but you can't buy a ticket to that event. It's literally your book is your ticket. So you can go and sign up for that at lovelifebook.com. And of course, the main reason to do it is not for the event. The book itself is 10 years of work. So I'm very, very proud of it. And I'm just excited. I'm truly excited for people to read it.
Love it. And she's thick. She's a thick book.
Yeah, she is.
Lots of good actionable information in there, I am sure. Last question that gets asked for everybody on the show. What does living a genius life mean to you?
Oh, man. Staying curious. I try to stay curious in everything I do. I try to stay curious about my work and never assuming I know everything. Just stay humble, be a student, ask dumb questions, and enjoy learning instead of having all of the answers. And for me, curiosity is always just a search for truth as opposed to a search for being right or a desire to be right all the time. And curiosity about myself and about ways that I can be in this world. You can get so stuck in your reality that you think that the way you live or the way you think or the way that you express or experience emotions is the only way there is. And that's natural because we've only ever had our experience, but you only have to look around to know that there are people in this world that are having a different experience than you, and that, they enjoy different things than you, that they don't seem to, be as affected by things as you, or that there's other ways of being and thinking, and seeing that and asking those people questions about those things. And how do you do that? How does this not bother you? And how do you get past that? And asking those dumb questions has always been enlightening for me, because it's allowed me to start to create different realities than the one that I thought was just reality. It's made me realize the way I've been my whole life is just one way of playing the game, but there are countless ways of playing the game. And there's just so much to learn by being curious about the ways that other people play it, because it might hold the key to a 1 degree shift that changes your whole reality about, what life is like, or what people are like, or what's possible for you. At the moment I started to be more vulnerable, my world changed. The moment I started to give more, my world changed. But as long as I was stuck in my reality of not trusting people with those parts of me, or not giving in certain ways because I was worried I would be taken advantage of, it kept me stuck in my reality, in my world. So for me, living a genius life is being endlessly curious. Yeah.
Amen. I love that, dude. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me, Max.
Hey, if you liked that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.